Surrender your firearms, Mr. Thorne. This is a direct order from the Community Compliance Task Force. That was the first sentence that shattered the silence of my Tuesday morning, hanging in the air like a bad joke that nobody laughed at. It wasn't the mailman. It wasn't the friendly wave of a neighbor walking a golden retriever. It was a command, barked with a cracked voice that tried too hard to sound like gravel and authority. I was standing in my garage, the smell of sawdust and gun oil grounding me, the morning light hitting the concrete in that specific, peaceful way that only happens in suburbia before the world wakes up. My hands were resting on my Sig Sauer P226, not in a firing grip, just holding it with the casual, respectful intimacy of a man who spent 30 years carrying steel in places where the sand gets into your soul. 3 men were blocking my driveway on Cedar Ridge Lane. And let me tell you, if you've ever spent time in a real combat zone, you develop a sixth sense for the counterfeit, for the things that just don't fit the pattern. These guys, they were staring at me with the kind of rehearsed intensity you see in straight-to-DVD action movies, wearing uniforms that were just a shade too dark, with creases that were pressed by a machine, not by discipline. The leader, a tall guy with a jaw that he kept jutting out like he was trying to catch rain, stepped forward, tapping a badge that caught the sun in a cheap, tinny flare. "I'm Jackson Vane," he announced, puffed up like a bullfrog. "Chief Officer of the CCTF. That's the Community Compliance Task Force for you civilians, and we are here to seize non-compliant weaponry." I didn't move, didn't flinch, just let my eyes do the work, scanning them from the ground up, dissecting them the way a surgeon looks at a patient. Real operators have a posture that comes from carrying weight, physical weight of the gear, emotional weight of the mission, but these guys stood like they were posing for a prom photo. Behind Vane stood Bricks, a guy built like a vending machine with a head, holding a radio to his mouth and whispering codes that didn't exist, and Sibley, a skinny nervous wreck clutching a clipboard like it was a ballistic shield. "I've lived in Willow Creek Estates for 5 years," I said, my voice low, letting the silence between the words do the heavy lifting. "And I've never heard of your task force, so I'm going to ask you once nicely to get off my property before things get complicated." Vane didn't like that, his eyes twitching, the mask slipping just a fraction. "We have jurisdiction under the new HOA bylaws, specifically Section 9 Alpha, mandatory disarmament for neighborhood safety," he spat out, while Sibley tried to thrust a piece of paper at me, his hand shaking so bad the paper sounded like a maraca. I looked at the uniform again, really looked at it, and the details started screaming at me. The stitching on Vane's shoulder patch was uneven, loose threads dangling where a real unit would have burned them off, and the material was polyester, the kind that melts to your skin in a fire, not the ripstop blend used by professionals. But the boots, oh man, the boots gave it away immediately. They were high-gloss, patent leather, virgin soles that had never touched mud, never kicked in a door, never marched a mile. These were costume props, and these men were playing dress-up in a world they didn't understand. "Your comms are dead," I said, nodding toward Bricks, who froze mid-whisper. "And your holster is sagging because you bought a universal fit from a discount store, not a retention rig meant for duty." Vane's face went from arrogant to flushed in a heartbeat, the heat rising up his neck. "You are obstructing an official investigation, Thorne, and we will use force if..." And then it clicked. The recognition hit me like a sniper round, not from the battlefield, but from late-night insomnia television. The frantic arm waving, the over-the-top cadence, the desperate need for attention. "You're the mattress guy," I said, a laugh escaping me before I could stop it, sharp and incredulous. "Vane's value mattresses, right? We bounced the competition away." "That's you." The air went out of the driveway instantly. Bricks looked at Vane, confusion clouding his eyes, and Sibley actually took a step back, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the pavement. Vane froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock, the chief officer, facade cracking wide open to reveal the failed salesman underneath. I don't know what you're talking about," Vane stammered, his voice jumping an octave. "I am a sworn officer of the..." "You're a sworn officer of memory foam." I cut him off, stepping out of the garage, crossing that invisible line they thought was a barrier. "You're an actor, a bad one, and you're standing on the property of a man who knows the difference between a soldier and a salesman." But just as the dynamic shifted, just as I had them on the ropes, a voice cut through the morning air like a jagged piece of glass. Officer Vane, is this resident refusing to comply? I looked past them to the street, and there she was, the puppet master, Corinna Ashby, the HOA president. She stood there with her arms crossed, phone in hand, looking like a general inspecting the troops, if the general was a suburban tyrant obsessed with lawn height regulations. Behind her, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, phones up, recording, whispering, unsure of what they were seeing. Corinna, I said, keeping my tone level, tell your circus act to pack up. They are protecting us, she shrieked, playing to the crowd, turning on the waterworks with terrifying speed. We have reports of you brandishing military weapons, threatening children. I have the video right here. She held up her phone, playing a video for the neighbors, a grainy, zoomed-in clip of me from yesterday, cleaning my rifle in the garage. But it was chopped, edited, slowed down to make my methodical cleaning motion look like I was aiming at the street, like I was hunting. It was a lie, a digital fabrication meant to paint a target on my back. He's unstable, Corinna yelled, pointing a manicured finger at me. He's a danger to Willow Creek Estates. Officer Vane, do your duty. The crowd murmured, fear rippling through them. Vane, emboldened by her hysteria, put his hand on his fake gun, a move that sent a cold spike of adrenaline into my system. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was a volatile cocktail of incompetence and malice, and that is when people get hurt. You touch that weapon, I said, my voice dropping to that command frequency I hadn't used since my last tour, and you will realize that life isn't a commercial. I didn't draw. I didn't need to. I just stood there, letting the weight of 30 years of service radiate off me, a silent wall of do not cross. Vane hesitated, his hand trembling over the grip. He saw it then, the difference between the costume he was wearing and the man I was. He pulled his hand back, swallowing hard. We will return with reinforcements, Vane muttered, backing away, nearly tripping over Sibley. This isn't over, Thorne. No, I whispered as they scrambled into their unmarked black SUV, which I noticed had an expired inspection sticker. It's just beginning. As they peeled away and Corinna stormed off, leaving the confused neighbors in her wake, I walked back into my house and locked the door. My wife, Elena, was standing in the hallway, her face pale, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. Are they gone? She asked, her voice small. For now, I said, walking past her toward my study. But they'll be back tonight. And when they come, we won't be victims, Elena. We're going to be ready. I didn't sleep. Sleep is a luxury for people who aren't under siege. Instead, I turned my home office into what I used to call the bunker. To the untrained eye, it was just a room with 2 mini monitors and a heavy lock. But to me, it was the nerve center of a counteroffensive. I spent the afternoon digging, my fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling threads that Vane and Corinna thought were buried. It didn't take long. Jackson Vane had a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt. Impersonation, petty fraud, larceny. Bricks, real name Marcus Stone, was a bouncer kicked out of 3 clubs for excessive force. And Sibley? He was just a kid with a forgery charge who probably needed the money. They weren't cops. They were hired muscle for a power-hungry HOA president who wanted to turn our neighborhood into her personal kingdom. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in bruises of purple and orange, I activated the perimeter. I had cameras hidden in the birdhouse, the porch light, even the fake rock by the garden hose. Every angle was covered. On the desk, the controller for Sky Eye, my thermal drone, sat ready, its green lights blinking in the dim room. Elias, Elena said, standing in the doorway, watching the monitors flicker with live feeds of our front lawn. This is a lot. Are we safe? We're safer than they are, I told her, squeezing her hand. Go to the safe room, lock the door, and put your headphones on. I need you to trust me. She nodded, the fear in her eyes replaced by a steel resolve I loved her for, and left me to the darkness. At 0200 hours, the sensors tripped. A soft chime in my headset alerted me before they even stepped onto the driveway. I watched on the main monitor as the black SUV rolled up, lights off, engine idling low. 3 shadows spilled out. They were moving differently this time, more aggressive, holding tools. Bricks had a bolt cutter. Vane was holding something heavy, a battering ram wrapped in a towel. They weren't here to talk compliance anymore. They were here to break in, to plant evidence. Or worse. I felt that cold calm wash over me, the state of flow where the world slows down and options clarify. I launched Sky Eye. The drone lifted silently from the roof hatch, hovering 50 feet above them, its thermal camera painting them in glowing ghosts of heat against the cool ground. I hit record. Every step, every whisper, every crime was being streamed to a secure cloud server. Go for the side gate, I heard Vane hiss through the drone's directional mic. Cut the power if you can. They moved toward the gate, confident in the darkness, thinking they were the predators. They had no idea they were walking into a kill box of humiliation. I waited until they were in the center of the lawn, completely exposed. Gentlemen, my voice boomed through the hidden outdoor PA system, amplified and distorted just enough to sound like the voice of God. You are trespassing on private property. They jumped like scalded cats. Sibley dropped the bolt cutters with a clang that echoed down the street. Vane spun around, trying to find the source of the voice, aiming a flashlight into the void. This is the CCTF, Vane screamed, his voice cracking, desperate to regain control. Open up, or we breach. Wrong answer. I murmured, my finger hovering over the control panel. Engage protocol, disco. I hit the button. The yard exploded, not with explosives, but with light. High-intensity tactical strobes, hidden in the landscaping, began to fire in a disorienting, irregular rhythm. 30,000 lumens of blinding white light assaulted them from every angle. It's a technique designed to overload the optic nerve and scramble the brain's equilibrium. Bricks stumbled, dropping the battering ram, clutching his eyes. Sibley fell to his knees, completely disoriented, vomiting on the pristine grass. Vane tried to shield his face, swinging blindly, shouting orders that nobody could hear over the second part of my defense. The sound, a high-frequency siren, the kind that vibrates in your teeth, ripped through the air. It was chaos. Beautiful, controlled chaos. Get up, you idiots. Vane yelled, but he was stumbling, spinning in circles, trapped in the strobe storm. I grabbed the microphone again. You have 10 seconds before the sprinklers engage. And trust me, it's not water in the tanks tonight. That was a bluff. It was just water, but they didn't know that. Panic, raw and primal, took over. The facade of the tough security team evaporated. Bricks ran first, crashing into the side of their SUV in his blindness. Sibley crawled toward the street on all fours. Vane, the mattress king, looked up at the house, at the dark window where he knew I was watching, and flipped me the bird before sprinting away, tripping over his own tactical boots. They piled into the car, tires screeching, leaving behind their dignity and a pair of bolt cutters. I killed the lights. The silence rushed back in, heavy and ringing. My heart was hammering a steady rhythm against my ribs. I watched the taillights disappear around the curve of Cedar Ridge Lane. Got you, I whispered, saving the footage. I got all of you. But as I sat there, the adrenaline fading, I knew this wasn't the end. Corinna Ashby wouldn't stop. Vane wouldn't stop. They were cornered rats now, and rats bite. I needed to finish this, not with strobes, but with ironclad justice. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Agent Sterling, I said when the voice on the other end answered. It's Thorne. I need to call in a favor, and you're going to want to bring the breaching kit. The next morning, the neighborhood was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels like the air before a thunderstorm. But inside the bunker, the atmosphere was electric. I had sent the package at dawn, for gigabytes of high-definition video, audio logs, background checks, and a breakdown of the impersonation scheme that was so detailed it could have been a court filing on its own. At noon, the cavalry arrived. But it wasn't the local cops Corinna thought she owned. 2 black Suburbans, identical to the ones Vane tried to mimic, but carrying a weight of legitimacy he could never fake, rolled down Cedar Ridge Lane. They didn't park, they deployed. Doors flew open and men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with federal agent poured out. I walked out to the porch just as Agent Sterling stepped out of the lead vehicle. She looked exactly the same as she did in Kabul. Sharp eyes, hair pulled back tight, a presence that made the air temperature drop 5 degrees. Thorne, she nodded, not smiling. You always did know how to throw a party. I just provided the venue, Sterling, I replied. The entertainment is down the street. We watched as the team moved on Corinna Ashby's house. It was swift, brutal in its efficiency. Corinna came out the front door in a silk robe, screaming about her rights, about knowing the mayor, about how we were all trespassing. But when Agent Vance, a guy built like a tank, slapped the cuffs on her, the screaming stopped. It was replaced by the shocked gasp of a bully who finally met someone she couldn't intimidate. Simultaneously, reports came in over Sterling's radio. They hit the motel where Vane and his crew were hiding. They found them trying to burn fake badges in the bathtub. Jackson Vane, the man who wanted to be a commander, was dragged out in his underwear, crying. The trial 3 months later was the final nail in the coffin. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, wearing my best suit, watching the prosecutor dismantle them piece by piece. They played the video, my video. The jury watched in high definition as Vane threatened me, as Corinna faked the 911 call, as they tried to breach my home. But the twist came when Corinna took the stand. She tried to play the victim, the confused grandmother. But then her own lawyer, realizing the ship was sinking, asked her about the money. It turned out the fines they were collecting weren't going to the HOA. They were going to a shell company in the Caymans. She wasn't just a tyrant, she was a thief. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. The judge, a stern woman with zero patience for nonsense, looked at Corinna like she was something she scraped off her shoe. The verdict was swift. Jackson Vane, 15 years for impersonating a federal officer, assault, and fraud. Corinna Ashby, 10 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. Bricks and Sibley took plea deals, turning on their bosses. When I walked out of that courthouse, the sun felt warmer. The air tasted cleaner. But the story didn't end there. I couldn't just go back to mowing the lawn. I had seen how fragile our safety really was, how easily people surrendered to fake authority just because they were afraid to ask questions. I converted my garage, the same garage where Vane had tried to intimidate me, into a headquarters. I founded the Sterling Freedom Initiative. It started small, just teaching neighbors how to spot fake IDs, how to understand their rights, how to secure their homes without living in fear. One afternoon, a kid named Leo, the son of the neighbor who had filmed the initial encounter, walked in. He looked at the display case where I kept Vane's fake badge next to my real service medals. "Mr. Thorne," Leo asked, tracing the glass, "were you scared?" I looked at the badge, then at the boy. "Fear is information, Leo. It tells you something is wrong. But courage? Courage is what you do with that information. Willow Creek Estates is quiet now. The CCTF is a bad memory. But every time I see a security car roll by, I watch it a little closer. I check the uniform. I check the eyes. Because the price of freedom isn't just paid on a battlefield overseas. It's paid in driveways and cul-de-sacs, in the moments where we decide to stand our ground or kneel. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? In a world where anyone can buy a badge online and a uniform on Amazon, how many of us are obeying orders from people who have no right to give them? How many Jackson Vanes are out there right now, knocking on doors, banking on the fact that you'll be too polite to say no? Stay vigilant. Stay free. And never, ever let them sell you a mattress you didn't ask for. Thorne out.